Hi, welcome or welcome back to the channel. Every 3 months, I like to do a quarterly reflection where I gather my thoughts on the music that I've been making, the work that I've been thinking about, the videos that I share on my channel. These videos help me process all of the activity that happens around my music making, and I think they serve as nice snapshots to document uh, a continuous line of thought and activity throughout the work that I do. This has been a quiet quarter for the channel. If you missed the last one of these videos, you might not know that I'm in the middle of doing whatever I want. But just because not a lot is happening on the channel doesn't mean there aren't things for me to check in on, and I like to maintain the continuity of these reflections. So here's a little report. As I said in my last reflection, I'm currently focused on several introspective activities that, while musical, are not exactly making music. I've been reading some music theory books, reading some math books, getting things organized, clarified, and also resting, feeling winter, feeling the passage of time, introspecting. All of these things, I think, if done with the right thoughtfulness and intention, are musical activities. That is to say, they are all activities that are shaping and developing my future musical activity. Perhaps like a jar of briny cabbage, I hope to become exquisite through this winter's fermentation. But speaking more concretely, I do have a fun little update to share here on the channel. I got a new mixing board. It is a Mackie 1604 VLZ, and it only kind of fits on the screen, huh? I think this is about as big as I would ever go for a mixing board. It's easy enough to move around, but I wouldn't really want to take this one too far out of the house. As I was looking at it in the store, though, I realized that it has some features that I think I could have a lot of fun exploring, so I decided to pick it up. First off, look at all these preamps. Every single channel on the 1604 has a preamp, and there are channel inserts on the back for all of them, which means a lot of independent feedback channels. The mid EQ is variable on all of the channels as well, which opens up some new interesting opportunities for tuning up feedback, I think. And then there are 6 aux sends with a toggle switch between the 3/4 and the 5/6 sends, which actually opens up some performance opportunities for the instrument that are even more interesting perhaps than if it had 6 different sends all separate from each other. Then there are these submixes to work with that can be assigned, the different channels can be assigned to. There's lots of buttons for routing and control. I'm certainly intrigued by this little behemoth. Something that really surprised me, though, about this mixing board, and that I want to flag for anyone else who is looking at this one compared to the other Mackies that I have, is that the channel inserts are at a slightly different point in the signal flow. On the 1202 and the 1402, my other mixing boards, the inserts are after the trim and low cut and before the EQ and the gain. On the 1604 here, the inserts are after the trim, but before the low cut and the EQ and the gain. That is, unlike the 1202 and the 1402, the feedback loop that you can create on independent channels here is entirely before the low cut switch. The front panel sort of reflects this. You can see the low cut switch is down here rather than up here next to the trim as it is on the 1202 and the 1402. But what this means is that when you're working with independent feedback loops, you can't get that low cut on the independent loop. This makes it much more difficult to get independent oscillators in the frequency range that I think many would prefer for working with, as I have those oscillators set up on my other mixing boards. Things start low and very quickly drive down into the sub-audio frequencies with the 1604. That little shift in the low cut makes a really big difference, and it surprised me. Of course, with 6 aux sends and a variety of other routing options, there's still plenty of things to do with this mixing board, and I look forward to showcasing what I learn about it as I really dig into it this year. But it's not going to be a 16 oscillator drone machine, which is too bad. Let's jump into a book pick for the quarter. I'm going to talk about Simple Composition by Charles Wuorinen. Now, my impression is that a lot of people don't like Wuorinen. A lot of the discussion that I see around his work and his persona is quite sour. But I think a lot of the criticism directed towards him is ungenerous. I think it's easy to be a Wuorinen hater, and I think we can do better than that. Of course, my impression of Wuorinen is that he also sometimes makes choices when speaking or writing that are a little annoying. He frames things in a way that sometimes might invite annoyance. Take the title of this book, for example. There's really nothing simple about simple composition. So, what is it? I would describe simple composition as the presentation of a musical system, which Wuorinen defines as a set of operations on a set of defined elements, along with compositional guidance for how to develop methods to generate complex music out of this musical system. The elements of the system that Wuorinen presents here are the 12 pitch classes of 12-tone equal temperament, as well as the collection of these elements into groupings or sets. And the operations of the system are the sorts of things that you might be familiar with if you've looked at any sort of serial composition technique. Things like transposition, inversion, retrogression, different ways to manipulate these sets of musical elements. And as a presentation of the elements and operations of the musical system that describes pitch class sets, I think the book is quite approachable in how it lays out these ideas. In that way, it certainly works great as a fundamental introduction to a certain style of musical composition. But beyond that, I think the book presents an approach to formal composition that I find quite appealing and quite distant from my impression of serial approaches, which are often intensely dogmatic and total in how they are expected to work on a musical system. For Wuorinen, the compositional process of making a piece of music is not the same as the underlying musical system, the material and the operations that are called on to construct a piece. The compositional process becomes a treatment of that system that is open to expression, adaptation, and a prioritization of aesthetic outcome. As Wuorinen says at the end of a section providing general advice to the young composer, a compositional method exists only to write pieces. It is not sacred, and when the piece has reached, through application of the method, a sufficient degree of completeness, it will begin to assert its own rights and needs. These may often seem to contradict the original method or call for changes in the work's design. Do not hesitate when such a situation arises. If the method has served long enough to allow the work it has produced to contradict it, it has more than fulfilled its function. And this is what I look for in a theory of composition: a deep consideration of the materials at hand, a variety of strategies for building something out of that material, and then a willingness to acknowledge that the system is less important than what you make out of it. A system cannot guarantee aesthetic success. It cannot justify compositional decisions for you, but it should furnish methods of creating and methods of perceiving and analyzing the work that allow you to work exquisitely. If you're interested in formal approaches to composition or working with pitch class sets and operations on those sets, I think that Simple Composition is a great book to support those interests. As for a music pick this quarter, I think it's about time for me to say a few words regarding No Input Mixing Board by Toshimaru Nakamura. While the history of feedback patching and mixer feedback extends far back into the 20th century, I think the specific framing of the mixing board as an instrument, the idea of the, quote, no input mixing board, And many of the contemporary practices for working with the mixing board as a feedback instrument can trace their paths of development through the work of Toshimaru Nakamura. But that's not really what I want to talk about right now. I want to focus on the music of this album and not reduce Nakamura's work to a technical obsession with his instrument. Because if you listen to the album, you might forget the mixing board and instead notice its circular structures, its glass-like tones, the ways that elements jitter and cut. Things float around and wrap back on themselves in a way that allows you to examine and appreciate the small details of the album's sonic constructions. This experience of the album, the encounters with its sounds and forms, I think deserves its own energy. As I listen to the album, I'm struck by the particular blend of sparseness and total enclosure. Many of the sounds are simple, elemental, nearly abstractions of pure air, water, and earth, it feels like, and they enclose the listener completely. Certain tracks on the album are surprisingly regular in their rhythms and swells of energy. I think Nim number 3, for example, could quite fairly be analyzed as a sort of minimal techno track. Nim number 6, on the other hand, feels almost like a scherzo. It is brief, energetic, and strangely humorous. The world of the album is developed through a diversity of character sketches, as I see it. Some short and fragmentary, others longer and meditatively fixed. As a whole, the album takes on a varied journey-like form. Perhaps a sort of travel sketch, it presents a variety of encounters with elemental sounds. As with all of the music that I mention here, my intentions are twofold. First, I mean to identify works that are meaningful to me, and to one degree or another, attempt to briefly explain why I care about them and why I think they're important. But also, I hope to encourage anyone following these videos to listen to these works with fresh and curious ears. In either case, I hope that you consider the album fairly on your own and give it the time it deserves as something important. Usually, I end these videos with something of a look ahead to what I expect will be happening next quarter. But today, I make no promises about what happens next. I'm still fermenting. We're still in the period of unpredictability, and I'm enjoying it. I do, however, find that I keep writing down ideas for future videos. There are things that I want to explore, things that I want to share, and things that I want to try and explain. I started talking on this channel to document and share some of the techniques that I had figured out for the mixing board. I wanted to, as best as I could, create the resources that I wished that I had when I started. And as I continue to explore and learn new things, I think there will continue to be more of those types of things that I want to build resources for. Things that I wish I had as I progressed down those paths. And I think that about does it for my winter check-in here. Until next time, I hope that you make music, explore, and be generous with what you find. Take care.